The jungle doesn't roar. It waits. And in that waiting, there is a silence thick enough to smother a man's breath. No birds. No insects. Not even the whine of a mosquito brave enough to break the stillness. Just the damp, oppressive hush of something ancient. Watching. A soldier lies prone in the mud. His face is streaked with sweat and camouflage paint, but neither is enough to mask the tremble in his jaw. The night around him is ink black, made worse by the curtain of mist rising from the warm forest floor. He can't see more than a few yards ahead, and that's what's making him sweat more than the heat. He doesn't know what he saw. The rest of his squad is crouched nearby, motionless. Nobody speaks. Nobody dares. A moment ago, their point man had frozen mid-step and thrown up a fist, standard signal. Then came the hand across the throat. Enemy sighting. Maybe VC, maybe something else. But the thing that had moved through the trees didn't sound human. It didn't make any sound at all. From where he lay, the soldier had glimpsed a shape gliding between the trees. Not walking, gliding. Smooth. Silent. The trees didn't even seem to sway as it passed. Just a shimmer of something tall and narrow, like a man wrapped in water, with skin that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. He tries to steady his breathing, but each inhale tastes like mildew and rust. He presses his cheek to the stock of his rifle, listening harder than he ever has in his life. Then, movement. Up ahead, something shifts. The foliage parts, just slightly. A figure steps into view, tall and lean. At first it looks like a man. Bare skin glinting silver. But then the soldier sees it clearly. The sheen isn't from sweat or gear, it's the creature's skin itself. Scaled. Glossy. Lizard-like. It turns slightly, revealing a head that's all wrong. Too narrow. No ears. The jaw tapers into a snout. The eyes glow faintly yellow, as if lit from inside. The soldier's heart slams into his chest like a dropped grenade. He wants to move. Wants to scream. But his body betrays him. He lies frozen, paralyzed by some deeper instinct. The one that says, don't move. Don't breathe. Don't be seen. The creature doesn't make a sound. Doesn't sniff the air like an animal. Doesn't turn its head like a man. It just watches. Not scanning. Not curious. Just aware. And then, as silently as it arrived, it steps backward, vanishing into the dark, taking the cold with it. Seconds tick by. Someone in the squad mutters a prayer. The mist stirs again. Another figure appears. Then another. 4 in total. Each one nearly 7 feet tall, moving in single file through the trees. They glow faintly, like moonlight clinging to their forms, and their skin, glistening like wet leather, flashes with every step. No weapons. No clothes. No sound. Just an eerie stillness that moves. And then, nothing. The jungle swallows them. The soldier exhales slowly. His body begins to shake. His sergeant taps him twice on the shoulder. Move out. They do, silently, cautiously, as if every shadow now hides a figure just waiting to emerge. It won't be the last time these creatures are seen. But it will be the last time no one fires. Because by the next morning, another team, deeper in the jungle, will open fire on something they can't explain. And bullets will bounce. The Quang Binh province of Vietnam is a place that doesn't let you forget how old the earth really is. Dense jungles grow from mountains that look like the spine of something ancient. Jagged limestone cliffs tear up from the ground like broken teeth. There are places where the sun never quite makes it through the canopy, where daylight feels like an afterthought. Even the birds seem to sing from memory rather than joy. And in the late 1960s, it was war that gave this region a name most Americans had never heard before. Quang Binh sits just north of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone that once divided North and South Vietnam. To the US military, it was a vital artery. Enemy forces moved through this terrain using a spiderweb of hidden trails and tunnel systems to smuggle weapons, food, and reinforcements. To cut off the flow, American soldiers were sent into the most remote parts of this jungle with one objective: seek and destroy. But the jungle wasn't just a battlefield. It was alive in a way that didn't make sense. It was something more than terrain. Something indifferent. Watching. Breathing. Consuming. Men spoke in hushed voices about what they'd seen, not just in combat, but in the long silences between gunfire. Whispers about figures glimpsed in the trees. About caves that breathed. About creatures that weren't men, and yet walked like them. To speak of it too loudly was to invite mockery. Or worse, to be relieved of duty on psychological grounds. So most of them kept quiet. Somewhere deep inside the jungle, a 19-year-old private named Collins traced his boot along a game trail barely wide enough for a dog. Ahead of him, his squad leader signaled a halt. The patrol froze. Even in silence, the jungle had a way of pressing in. The air was thick. Too warm. The smell of damp leaves and mold clung to the sweat on their uniforms. It was his first real deployment, and already had stopped counting the days. The rules of jungle warfare weren't written in any manual. Everything that should have been solid, borders, roads, even time, melted under the humidity and fear. One moment you were sweeping a trail, the next, you were scrambling behind a termite mound with incoming fire cracking overhead. The jungle hid everything. And not just the enemy. Collins had already learned what the older guys wouldn't say out loud: people disappeared out here. Sometimes it was ambushes, landmines, snipers. Sometimes it was just gone. No shots. No sounds. No screams. A man would be there 1 minute, then gone the next, like the jungle swallowed him. Still, they pressed forward. Because orders don't care about whispers. At the same time, half a mile away, another platoon moved through a dry creek bed, fanning out, weapons up, eyes scanning the tree line. At night, it became impossible to tell whether the wind carried leaves or whispers. Fireflies blinked like dying stars. A sound might be an animal. It might be an ambush. Or it might be something you'd never be able to explain. To the army brass, it was a map grid and a mission profile. But to the men on the ground, this place didn't feel like Earth anymore. It felt like something older. Like they were trespassing. Many soldiers who served in this region would return home with stories they never shared, not because they were unbelievable, but because they were too precise. The memories didn't fade like dreams. They clung to the edges of sleep, recurring night after night, unchanged. Always the same setting. Always the same eyes staring back from the dark. And in every one of these stories, there were no gunshots. No battle. Just something else. Watching. Moving. Not attacking. Not running. Just there. Quang Binh is home to some of the most rugged terrain in Southeast Asia. The Annamite Mountains slice through the region like a blade, riddled with caverns and tunnels. Many of these cave systems remain unexplored to this day, either because of wartime damage, collapsed entrances, or the sheer inaccessibility of the terrain. Even today, Sun Dome, the largest known cave in the world, sits buried beneath these same jungle ridges. It was only officially discovered in 2009, but locals had known of it long before. Hidden behind thick forests, accessible only by days of foot travel, its entrance was marked by the faint sound of wind roaring like a distant ocean. The cave's dimensions are so massive that it contains its own ecosystem, its own weather, even clouds. Trees grow inside. Entire jungles thrive in its depths. And for decades, no outsider knew it was there. That fact, more than anything, underscores what kind of place this was for soldiers during the war, a place that kept secrets. A place that never gave back what it took. A place that could hide entire worlds, and possibly, things no man was meant to see. Between 1965 and 1973, thousands of young men from America, Australia, and South Korea were inserted into these jungles to fight a war they didn't start. Some fought valiantly. Others broke. Some survived. Others disappeared, never found. But a handful came back with something else, memories that didn't fit anywhere in the stories we tell about war. Encounters. Shapes. Creatures. Not enemy soldiers. Not animals. Something else. These men weren't storytellers. They weren't mythmakers. They were trained observers. Disciplined. Reliable. And many of them never told their wives, their families, or even their fellow veterans. Because in war, you can admit to killing. You can admit to fear. But you can't admit to seeing something no one believes exists. Not if you want to be left alone. Not if you want to forget. They drop in fast. Rotor wash kicks up a cloud of dust and shredded leaves as the helicopter flares just above the canopy. One by one, the boots hit the ground, 12 men, faces tight with focus, rifles up. The jungle around them swallows the chopper noise almost immediately. Within seconds, the aircraft is gone, a fading thump behind a curtain of trees. It's late evening. The light is strange, silver leaking through the top of the canopy, bleeding across the forest floor like milk poured over moss. The squad fans out. Orders are clear: move quietly, stay tight, observe first, engage only if necessary. This isn't their first patrol, but the tension always hits differently at night. Corporal Ridgway, acting point man, gestures with 2 fingers and begins to pick a path through the undergrowth. The jungle is dense, every step a negotiation with roots, mud, and vines that seem to grab at their legs like hands. The insects drone loud enough to rattle the bones behind your eyes, but beneath it, there's something else, an absence. A hollow beneath the sound, like the jungle's holding its breath. They're north of the DMZ now. Deep in enemy territory. Which is why it doesn't make sense when Ridgway suddenly halts and throws up a fist. The squad drops to one knee instantly. Safety off. Eyes scanning the green darkness. Ridgway's hand moves again, knife edge across the throat. Stop. Eyes forward. Unknown movement. The men freeze, rifles up. A tense minute ticks by. 2. Then. Shapes. They appear not with a sound, but with an absence of one. No crunch of twigs, no rustle of leaves. Just motion. 4 figures, walking in single file, 50 meters out. Their silhouettes blur against the patchy moonlight, tall and smooth. For a moment, the men think they might be enemy soldiers, NBA sappers or scouts, moving with expert silence. But something is wrong. They're too tall. Way too tall. And they're glowing. Not bright, not dramatic. Just a soft, pale luminescence that makes their skin shimmer under the moonlight filtering through the canopy. Ridgway squints. No weapons. No packs. No helmets. No gear. Just tight, smooth bodies. At first he thinks they're wearing skin-tight suits. But then the light shifts, and he sees the scales. Not uniforms. Not clothing. Skin. Reptilian. Scales that ripple with each movement like water over armor. Head smooth, bald, almost serpentine. No helmets, those are their skulls catching the light. They're at least 7 feet tall, moving with unbroken fluidity. No stutter. No wasted motion. And they don't seem to see the Americans at all. Or worse, they see them, and simply don't care. The soldiers don't move. No one breathes. The jungle holds its breath with them. Then, just as silently, the figures vanish back into the trees, swallowed by the dark as if they were never there. 10 minutes pass before the squad moves again. Ridgway checks his compass, then nods forward. They say nothing. Because what would you say? How do you explain seeing something that your brain refuses to name? Hours later, in another quadrant of the jungle, 2 fiberglass patrol boats cut slowly through the narrow Black River. 8 soldiers total. 1 team per boat. The engines are killed, and the river carries them forward like driftwood. Night missions like this are always tense. Rules of engagement are brutal after sundown, anything that moves is assumed to be hostile. Locals have been warned. Stay home. Stay out of sight. If you're caught on the water or in the jungle at night, you're either Viet Cong or dead. But tonight is quiet. Too quiet. The officer in charge, Lieutenant Mendez, gives the order to pull ashore. Recon sweep. Quick in and out. Maybe they've seen something. Maybe it's just nerves. Either way, protocol demands it. The soldiers disembark, stepping into knee-high reeds and pushing into the brush. The jungle here feels heavier, the trees taller and more compressed. Within minutes, they're standing at the edge of a clearing they hadn't marked on their maps. And it's dead. No birds. No monkeys. Not even the mosquitoes are biting. Silence. This total never means anything good. Then they see it, piles. Scattered throughout the clearing. Animal dung. Maybe. But it's not from anything any of them have ever seen. Too large. Too neatly stacked. Like something with intention left them there. Like they were arranged. They don't get long to wonder. From the opposite tree line comes the crashing sound of undergrowth being ripped apart. They spin toward the noise, rifles raised, and freeze. Out from the trees come several tall, yellow-skinned humanoids. Not walking. Lumbering. 8 feet tall at least, each one with massive 3-toed feet, long arms that hang almost to the knees, and glowing yellow scales that seem to pulse with their heartbeat. Their hands end in hooked claws. Their faces are flat, eyeless at first glance, then the pupils flick open, snake-like, vertical, and fixed directly on the men. Time freezes. But the creatures don't charge. They don't growl. They just pass through the clearing. Right past the soldiers, not even looking directly at them. Gone. The men lower their weapons slowly, shaken. But as they begin to move back toward the boats, they hear it. Crashing behind them. Loud. Purposeful. The creatures are following. And this time, they're not pretending not to see them. The soldiers break into a run, crashing through the jungle, branches whipping their faces. The brush screams with movement behind them. The men fire blind over their shoulders. Muzzle flashes light up clawed feet, twitching faces. But the bullets don't drop them. Don't even seem to hurt them. They burst out of the trees onto the riverbank, dive into the boats, and scream for the coxswain to go. Engines roar. As the boats throttle away from shore, the soldiers look back. The yellow figures stand at the edge of the river, dozens of them now, watching. Silent. Glowing. Unmoving. The following morning, the men are still shaken, though they've said little. They've been briefed on what they saw, what they think they saw, and told to keep their mouths shut. In military parlance, the word for it is fog of war, but fog is what blankets the ground. What the men saw was no mist. It was the first light of dawn that brought them out of the trees and back into their boats. They moved quickly, not looking over their shoulders, but the figures they'd seen were imprinted in their minds. Imprinted more deeply than the things that should have mattered, the mission objectives, the radio frequencies, the tactics. It wasn't fear that gripped them, it was disbelief. At the riverbank, everything seems normal. The boat engines hum. The mist lifts. There's no sign of the creatures, no glowing bodies at the tree line. The jungle around them is as unforgiving as always. Yet, every rustle in the brush, every snap of a twig, sends a spike of alertness through the squad. The soldiers try to joke, but the laughter feels hollow. In the aftermath of the encounter, Lieutenant Mendez decides to reroute the team to a nearby clearing to regroup. It's a tactical decision, but his eyes have a look of suspicion in them. Maybe he's seen it too, the way they moved, silent and unmarked, like shadows on the ground. Ridgway's mind is elsewhere as they march toward the new clearing, which has been mapped as a potential extraction point. The soldiers' boots sink into the thick, spongy earth. Each footfall echoes too loudly in his skull. No birds call. No rustling leaves. His eyes keep drifting back to the trees. Every shadow seems to carry a threat now. "We've been out here too long," Collins mutters. His voice is quiet but not apologetic. "I'm telling you, something's off." Ridgway shoots him a glance. His lips tighten into a thin line, but he doesn't reply. The path ahead is rugged. Steep hillsides, fallen logs, tangled vines, they've passed through this kind of terrain before. No surprises, right? Wrong. They reach the clearing and stop. Ridgway, now on point, stares at the ground before him. There's something unsettling about the place. Too quiet. Even the insects have vanished. It's not natural. He motions for the squad to fan out, but the order feels mechanical. Every man here knows the drill. Stay alert. Secure the perimeter. Report in. Yet none of them can shake the creeping sensation that something is watching. Ridgway checks his compass, but it spins aimlessly in his hand. It's the humidity, he thinks. Or maybe it's just paranoia. Then, movement. Faint, but there. A shadow slips across the other side of the clearing, just beyond the line of trees. Ridgway freezes. Every muscle tenses. For a second, he wonders if it's a trick of the light. His heart races. But then, there it is again, a glimpse of something that moves too fast. Too wrong. His rifle snaps into position. Contact. 12 o'clock, he says, his voice low but sharp. His squad tenses, scanning the darkness in front of them, but nothing is clear. The shadow seems to vanish before they can react, swallowed by the thick jungle. "Point man, stay on it. The rest of you, stay low," Ridgway barks. They hunker down, eyes darting. Their rifles track every corner of the clearing, the brush, the distant tree line. Something's out there. Something's watching. The minutes crawl. Before long, they hear it. A deep, guttural sound. Like a low growl, but softer. A vibrating hum that shakes the air around them. Something is close. Ridgway's grip tightens on his rifle. His breath is shallow. He tries to see beyond the glare of moonlight, but the shadows bend in unnatural ways. The jungle has become a maze, every angle too sharp, every movement too quick. And then, another figure steps into view. Not one of theirs. The glowing skin. The serpentine head. The eyes that gleam with a yellow light. Taller than any man he's ever seen, at least 8 feet. Its skin shimmers like wet leather, and its hands are huge, sharp, and glinting in the low light. It doesn't move like a person. It moves with liquid grace, too smooth. Like something ancient. Something not meant to exist. Ridgway's heart stops for a beat. The creature tilts its head toward them, making no sound, but its eyes, those eyes, cut through the jungle darkness and meet his. And then, just as quietly as it had come, it vanishes again. The men are motionless. No one moves. No one breathes. Ridgway's mind races. He had seen it before. But now, it's here again. Not just an apparition. Not a ghost. A creature. Alive. Watching. There's no mistaking it. Then comes another noise. Louder now. More creatures. 1, 2, 3, 4, more moving through the trees. Tall. Glowing. Like a pack of them. They walk in single file, as if they have somewhere to go. As if they belong here. Ridgway's mind starts to unravel. This can't be happening. He knows what he saw, but the part of him that is a soldier, trained to believe in the tangible, can't accept it. He can't. A shout from the far side of the clearing breaks his focus. Contact. They're coming in. The shout turns into a scream. Then the sound of heavy boots, of the squad scrambling into action. The creatures have noticed them now. It's happening again. Ridgway turns and motions for retreat. He doesn't wait for orders. He's already running, feeling his pulse in his ears. His men follow, rifle butts hitting the ground, weapons still raised. Behind him, he hears the brush rustling. They're coming. They break from the trees and reach the riverbank. The boats are just ahead, thank God. The coxswains are already starting the engines. The men scramble, diving into the boats, firing blindly at the jungle that seems to close in around them. The creatures are still there. He can feel them, moving just behind, their glowing forms swaying in the dark. Go! Go! Ridgway yells, pulling the nearest coxswain away from the throttle. The boats lurch forward, engines roaring as they shoot into the river. Ridgway looks back, expecting to see figures at the tree line. But it's worse than that. As they speed away from the shore, the glowing figures are not standing at the river's edge. They are in the water. Just beneath the surface, their forms flash with a ghostly light. One by one, the men turn, staring at the impossible sight. The figures glide beneath the boats, following them down the river. No sound. No splash. Just the light. Watching. Waiting. The jungle swallows them whole. By the time the patrol boats reached the forward operations base just south of the DMZ, no one was talking. Not about the creatures. Not about what they saw in the water. The officers in charge chalked up their silence to fatigue. Combat stress. Jungle fever, maybe. But the look in the men's eyes wasn't one of confusion. It was certainty, certainty about something they weren't ready to say out loud. That night, Lieutenant Mendez filed his patrol report. He mentioned the altered route, the reconnaissance sweep, and a brief loss of directional orientation. He noted unidentified movement along the riverbank. Nothing about glowing skin. Nothing about reptilian humanoids. Privately, Mendez asked to speak with the chaplain. Not the medical officer. Not command. The chaplain. Ridgway, meanwhile, was pulled into a side tent with two intelligence officers, non-uniformed. Stateside accents. Not regular army. They asked questions slowly, precisely, and repeated details even after he answered clearly the first time. How tall did you say the figure was again? Could it have been a man in a poncho? Are you certain the eyes glowed? Could it have been reflected light? He gave them what he could. No embellishment. No exaggeration. Ridgway had seen men freeze in fear. Had seen hallucinations after trauma. This wasn't that. This was something else. He mentioned the strange piles in the clearing. The skin. The light. They didn't write anything down. Just nodded. After 20 minutes, they told him to get some rest and return to patrol rotation within 48 hours. No therapy. No follow-up. No record. It wasn't until the next evening that Ridgway learned another squad had been rerouted into a steep jungle valley near the western range. That was where everything escalated again. The squad was led by Sergeant Miller, a veteran of 3 prior tours. Steady, no nonsense. The kind of man other soldiers didn't question, even when they disagreed. His team had set up camp by late afternoon, positioned in a narrow depression flanked by cliffs and dense brush. They weren't scheduled for recon until morning, so the men spent the evening writing letters, eating from ration tins, and keeping an ear out for movement. Around 2,200 hours, Miller ordered a half-squad patrol into one of the side valleys. He wanted them to familiarize themselves with the terrain before first light. The group moved slow, avoiding dry branches and snapping roots. About 30 minutes into the valley, they caught signs of movement, flickers of motion, like scattered shadows shifting between trees. They stopped. Listened. Waited. But there were no clear shapes, no sound of speech. Then, at the base of a slope, they found something unexpected, a rock wall partially obscured by brush. Carved into the stone face was an opening, 5 feet high, maybe 3 feet wide at the base, narrowing at the top like a wedge. One of the soldiers, Corporal Hennings, described it as cleanly cut, like with a blade, or a machine. Even stranger, the groove markings along the interior edge. Evenly spaced. Parallel. Too symmetrical to be natural. They thought it might be a supply tunnel or ammo cache, maybe even an unfinished VC hideout. But as they approached, a stench hit them like a wave. Sulfur. Rot. Something between eggs and decay. The kind of smell that turns your stomach before your brain can place it. The team backed off instinctively. Miller swore, pulled out a flashlight and tried to scan inside, but the beam barely penetrated. The cave swallowed the light. A haze hung at the entrance, not like mist but like vapor. Chemical. Unnatural. Miller ordered a temporary perimeter about 150 feet back. The men concealed themselves in dense brush, facing the cave. The plan was simple: wait. Observe. Move in at dawn if needed. But what followed wasn't silence. It was rumbling. Not distant thunder. Not helicopters. It came from inside the rock. A low, deep vibration, like something shifting far below. Breathing. They waited. Every man had his rifle drawn. No one spoke. As the night stretched on, Hennings noticed the others weren't sleeping. Miller sat beside him, lips moving. Not praying. Just repeating something. A word or phrase. Around 0500 hours, just as the light began to pale the treetops, movement stirred at the cave mouth. A shape emerged. Then another. They stood upright, over 7 feet tall, by Henning's account. Covered in dark green scales, almost black. Skin shimmered like wet stone. Their arms were long and jointed like a man's, but too smooth. Too perfect. They wore garments, robes, almost. Long, one-piece wrappings. No insignias. No color. Just cloth that hung with precision. Their heads were smooth and elongated, with mouths too wide, and eyes that didn't blink. They hissed. Not loud. But deliberate. As if they knew they were being watched. Miller gave no order. But every man opened fire at once. The vegetation between them and the cave was shredded in seconds, round after round tearing into brush, stone, and air. The hissing stopped. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing. No blood. No bodies. No movement. They swept the area cautiously. But the creatures were gone. The trail, if there had been one, disappeared into the earth. They set charges and collapsed the cave entrance with C4. No follow-up team was dispatched. No report was filed. The squad returned to camp. Miller gave no statement. None of the men spoke of it for weeks. Back at the main base, Ridgway overheard part of their debrief, just fragments, whispered under breath. Same build as the river ones. Different color. Taller. Robes this time. Robes. That was new. Ridgway asked questions, quietly. A few guys hinted. A few shut down. Most said nothing. But he started to see a pattern, one that nobody wanted to map. All the sightings occurred at night. All near or within proximity to deep jungle valleys or cave structures. All involved large, humanoid beings, scaly, glowing, or both. And none of the creatures had ever spoken. No aggression. No communication. No fear. They simply appeared, observed, and vanished, unless provoked. Ridgway went back to his quarters and pulled out his folded jungle maps. He circled 3 locations based on what Head heard: the river patrol site, the clearing from his team's first sighting, and the collapsed cave. He drew lines between them. They formed a loose triangle. And at the center of it all, Quang Ben's Western Highlands, where the limestone mountains held secrets millions of years old. In 1990, long after the war, a Vietnamese logger named Ho Con would stumble upon the mouth of a cave while fleeing sudden rainfall. He would describe the air inside as breathing, cool, moving, alive. Head later guided a group of British explorers to the site, where they would confirm the find as Hang Son Doong, the largest cave on Earth. A cave large enough to contain its own clouds, its own jungle, its own rivers. But what Ho never reported publicly, at least not in the official record, was what he saw inside that cave the first time, before the scientists came. A shape. A figure. Staring back at him from the dark. And when he tried to photograph the tunnel, something, just barely, showed up in the flash. Not a trick of the light. Not a shadow. Eyes. And the hint of a mouth. Peering around the bend, watching him. Waiting. The jungle doesn't give up its secrets easily. But over time, certain patterns refuse to stay buried. Ridgway had started seeing them before his deployment ended, before he stopped asking questions. Not because he had answers, but because the questions themselves were starting to feel dangerous. Each encounter, the boat crew, the cave squad, had happened within the same 30-mile radius of Quang Ben province. All at night. All near cave entrances or river bends carved deep into limestone mountains. But it wasn't just the terrain. It was the behavior. The creatures were never openly hostile. They didn't ambush. Didn't use weapons. Didn't speak. But they watched. They tracked. They reappeared across distances no human could traverse so quickly without being seen or heard. They moved like sentries. Like something was being guarded. Years later, long after Head left the military, Ridgway found the cave again. Not physically, but on a computer screen, in a small rented office with bad lighting and a dial-up modem. He was half asleep, scrolling through news articles when he saw it. World's largest cave discovered in Vietnam. Hang Son Doong. The photograph was grainy. A human silhouette dwarfed by a tunnel hundreds of feet high. Light pierced down through the ceiling, illuminating a jungle inside the cave. He read the coordinates. Pulled out his old maps. Same province. Same mountains. Same triangle. He didn't sleep that night. Because the more he looked, the more things began to echo. The sulfuric stench at the entrance of the cave in 69 matched modern descriptions of Son Doong's lower chambers, where air pressure shifts cause the wind to rise suddenly, as if the cave is exhaling. The mist? Explained by science. Microclimates. Condensation. But what about the eyes? The scales? The robe-covered figures emerging at dawn? Those weren't part of any geological study. And then there was Ho Con's story. Official records say Ho discovered Son Doong in 1990. But local loggers tell a different version. According to one, Ho had found the cave much earlier, possibly as a teenager, but was too frightened to enter it again. He hadn't just seen a cave. Had seen something inside. Years later, a video surfaced online, a low-resolution upload claiming to show a Polaroid photo Ho had taken near the cave entrance. The image was murky, but in the far back of the tunnel, something faintly humanoid stood half in shadow. It had a long, narrow face. Reflective eyes. No one could say for sure what it was. The uploader gave no source, no details. But Ridgway recognized the posture. The stillness. The way it seemed to be watching without moving. Just like in the clearing. Just like at the river. Just like in the cave. It was the same thing. Or another one of them. By the early 2000s, the rumors had started to circulate in different corners of the internet, veteran message boards, old coast-to-coast AM broadcasts, cryptid forums. Reptilian humanoids spotted during the Vietnam War. Some described them as aggressive. Others, passive. But the commonalities always remained. Tall. Scaled. Bioluminescent skin. Lizard-like faces. Deep-set eyes. And always, the jungle. The caves. Some even theorized the bombing campaigns had driven them out, forced them into temporary visibility. The jungle shook, the earth split, and something that had been hiding for centuries stepped forward. Briefly. Then retreated. Others suggested they weren't native at all. That they were put there, not by man, but by something older. A remnant of a species from long before humanity. Cave dwellers evolved in total darkness. Not aliens. Not gods. Just something else. Something we don't have words for. Ridgway never told his family. Not about the river. Not about the patrol. Not about what they shot at, or what didn't bleed. He never needed to. Because the dreams never stopped. Same clearing. Same shape. Every time. Watching. But he wasn't alone. In 2015, a story appeared on a blog run by paranormal researcher Lon Strickler. It detailed the encounter from the Cave Valley, the one Ridgway had only heard rumors of. But this time, the report came directly from a soldier. Retired. Verified. Decorated. It was the same cave. The same green-scaled figures. The same hissing. Strickler wrote that the man had come forward only after decades of silence, and only after being assured his identity would be protected. He never wanted credit. Just confirmation that he hadn't imagined it. That someone else had seen them too. Even Art Bell got wind of it. The legendary radio host, whose coast-to-coast AM program had become a lighthouse for the strange and unexplained, referenced the Vietnam reptilian sightings in one of his later broadcasts. He never named sources. Never gave dates. But his voice, usually skeptical and dry, carried a note of quiet reverence. Some of the guys who came back from that war, he said, didn't just bring home nightmares. They brought home silence. And the silence, sometimes, is the loudest evidence of all. Ridgway still walks with a slight limp, a relic from a booby trap, not the jungle creatures. But if you were to ask him what wounded him the most, he wouldn't mention the war. He'd tell you about the moment he realized that some truths don't get medals. They get forgotten. Buried. Just like the caves. Because there's a difference between fear and mystery. Fear can be explained. But mystery? That stays with you. It curls in the back of your mind. It waits. Just like the jungle. If you map the locations, a pattern emerges. Not one that fits cleanly into military strategy or topography, but something older, something shaped more by natural systems than human logic. Each sighting, the glowing humanoids in the jungle, the scaled giants on the riverbank, the black-robed figures near the cave, occurred within a specific radius in Quang Binh province, all within roughly 50 kilometers of one another. At the heart of this triangle sits the Sun Dome Cave system. The biggest known cave on Earth. A cave so deep it forms its own weather, its own rivers, its own ecosystem, shielded from the surface for millions of years. Before helicopters. Before history. Before humans. You don't have to believe in monsters to find that unnerving. Let's assume, for a moment, the sightings were real. Let's set aside hallucinations, heatstroke, trauma-induced memory distortion. Let's take these soldiers, trained observers, professionals, as credible. What, then, could they have seen? Biologically, the idea of a reptilian humanoid isn't that far-fetched, at least in theory. We know that evolution favors environment. Cave-dwelling creatures often adapt in similar ways: elongated limbs, reduced pigmentation, heightened sensory systems. Many are blind. Some, like deep-sea fish, develop bioluminescent traits, small, pulsating organs that glow in the dark to communicate or attract prey. So what happens if a species, intelligent, adaptive, evolves not in the open air but in the underground voids of Earth's crust? It would be nocturnal. It would have skin suited for darkness. It might see us before we ever saw it. It might have lived there for millennia, long before we built nations on the surface. And we might have never known, until war drove men deeper into places no one had ever meant to go. The Vietnam War saw more than bombing runs and firefights. It saw deforestation on an unprecedented scale. Over 20 million gallons of chemical herbicides, like Agent Orange, were dumped across the jungle to expose enemy positions and destroy crops. Forests died. Topsoil eroded. Cave mouths, once covered by vegetation, were exposed. And soldiers were inserted into the vacuum. From the mountains to the river valleys, they pushed into terrain previously untouched. Not because they were explorers, but because the war gave them no choice. If something had been hiding, that's when it would have noticed us. That's when it would have stepped into the light. Just briefly. Long enough to see what we were. Long enough for us to see it. The creatures didn't attack first. They didn't speak. They watched. From behind the trees. From inside the caves. From beneath the surface of the river. Over and over, the same behavior: they observed, they followed, and they retreated. The only time shots were fired was when soldiers panicked, or when the beings made their presence undeniable. Even then, the bullets had little effect. They didn't retaliate. They didn't die. Which leads to a chilling question: were they studying us, too? Were we the intrusion? Were we the mystery? And then there's the detail many overlook: they wore clothing. Not armor. Not camouflage. Robes. Dark. Simple. Uniform. It's not the kind of detail a panicked soldier invents. It's a quiet signal of intelligence, of culture. Maybe even hierarchy. One witness described a cap-like covering on the creature's head. Another noted that their movements seemed coordinated, not random. What does that suggest? Discipline. Awareness. Control. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They knew exactly what they were doing. When Sun Dong was opened to explorers in the 2000s, strange stories followed. Tourists claimed to feel watched inside the cave. Some reported shapes moving behind rock pillars, only visible in peripheral vision. One group insisted their camera batteries drained without cause, only to regain charge when they exited the system. And then there was the video, the grainy, early YouTube upload with the alleged Polaroid taken by Ho Khan. A photo of a shadowy figure peering around a bend in the cave. Too dark to confirm. Too vivid to ignore. Skeptics dismissed it. The rest kept quiet. But the timing lined up. And the location fit the triangle. So what are we left with? 3 soldier testimonies from 3 separate encounters. Each describing humanoid beings, scaled and glowing, near deep jungle or cave systems. Each happening during or just after bombing campaigns or heavy deforestation. And all before Sun Dong had ever been discovered. It's easy to dismiss any one story. Stress. fear, misinterpretation. But it's harder to dismiss the pattern. And harder still to dismiss what that pattern implies. That we stumbled into someone else's world. That we came too close to something not meant to be found. And that instead of confronting us, they simply disappeared again. There's a theory among cryptozoologists, one they rarely say out loud in serious circles. It goes like this. Some creatures aren't cryptids. They're residents. They don't hide in the shadows because they fear us. They hide because they don't care to be known. And they don't leave signs behind because they don't want to be remembered. But sometimes, during disasters, in the chaos of war, those boundaries crack. The underground stirs. And something older slips through. Not to conquer. Not to communicate. Just to look. And then to vanish. Maybe that's all this was. A glance across a thin, temporary window between two worlds. The soldiers who saw them were never debriefed. The reports, if they exist, were never filed. The photos, if there are any, have never surfaced. What were left with is memory. Rumor. And a few fading maps with inked triangles drawn by hands that no longer shake, but never quite stopped remembering. The war may be over. But the jungle hasn't forgotten. And somewhere, deep beneath those hills, the eyes might still be watching. What if it didn't happen? What if everything, every glowing figure, every hissing voice, every flash of scales in the jungle, was nothing more than misfired adrenaline, poor visibility, and fractured memory? Because here's the uncomfortable truth, none of it was documented. Not officially. No reports were filed. No photographs submitted. No autopsies, no footprints, no blood trails. Just stories, passed from one soldier to another, hushed under the weight of ridicule or worse, dismissal. And in every one of these stories, there were no gunshots. No battle. Just something else. Watching. Moving. Not attacking. Not running. Just there. Quang Ben is home to some of the most rugged terrain in Southeast Asia. The Annamite Mountains slice through the region like a blade, riddled with caverns and tunnels. Many of these cave systems remain unexplored to this day, either because of wartime damage, collapsed entrances, or the sheer inaccessibility of the terrain. Even today, Sun Dome, the largest known cave in the world, sits buried beneath these same jungle ridges. It was only officially discovered in 2009, but locals had known of it long before. Hidden behind thick forests, accessible only by days of foot travel, its entrance was marked by the faint sound of wind roaring like a distant ocean. The cave's dimensions are so massive that it contains its own ecosystem, its own weather, even clouds. Trees grow inside. Entire jungles thrive in its depths. And for decades, no outsider knew it was there. That fact, more than anything, underscores what kind of place this was for soldiers during the war, a place that kept secrets. A place that never gave back what it took. A place that could hide entire worlds, and possibly, things no man was meant to see. Between 1965 and 1973, thousands of young men from America, Australia, and South Korea were inserted into these jungles to fight a war they didn't start. Some fought valiantly. Others broke. Some survived. Others disappeared, never found. But a handful came back with something else, memories that didn't fit anywhere in the stories we tell about war. Encounters. Shapes. Creatures. Not enemy soldiers. Not animals. Something else. These men weren't storytellers. They weren't mythmakers. They were trained observers. Disciplined. Reliable. And many of them never told their wives, their families, or even their fellow veterans. Because in war, you can admit to killing. You can admit to fear. But you can't admit to seeing something no one believes exists. Not if you want to be left alone. Not if you want to forget. They drop in fast. Rotor wash kicks up a cloud of dust and shredded leaves as the helicopter flares just above the canopy. One by one, the boots hit the ground, 12 men, faces tight with focus, rifles up. The jungle around them swallows the chopper noise almost immediately. Within seconds, the aircraft is gone, a fading thump behind a curtain of trees. It's late evening. The light is strange, silver leaking through the top of the canopy, bleeding across the forest floor like milk poured over moss. The squad fans out. Orders are clear: move quietly, stay tight, observe first, engage only if necessary. This isn't their first patrol, but the tension always hits differently at night. Corporal Ridgway, acting point man, gestures with 2 fingers and begins to pick a path through the undergrowth. The jungle is dense, every step a negotiation with roots, mud, and vines that seem to grab at their legs like hands. The insects drone loud enough to rattle the bones behind your eyes, but beneath it, there's something else, an absence. A hollow beneath the sound, like the jungle's holding its breath. They're north of the DMZ now. Deep in enemy territory. Which is why it doesn't make sense when Ridgway suddenly halts and throws up a fist. Not because they attacked. But because we couldn't stand the not knowing. Because it's easier to shoot at something than to ask what it means. So maybe this isn't a story about reptilian humanoids. Maybe it's a story about the limits of perception. About the edges of sanity during war. About what happens when the human brain is pushed past logic and into the raw wilderness of uncertainty. And maybe that's why the story breaks down here, because no theory holds up under the weight of so much missing. The more we look, the more we doubt. The more we doubt, the more we need to believe. And that's the paradox of the unknown. It needs silence to survive. And we are terrible at silence. Ridgway once said it like this: I never told anyone because the minute you do, it stops being real. You say it out loud, and suddenly it sounds like a dream. But it wasn't a dream. I was there. We all were. And none of us talk about it, not because we're afraid of what people will think. But because we're afraid we'll start thinking the same thing. That we imagined it. That it wasn't real. That the jungle really did swallow us whole, and gave us back something too strange to carry. So maybe it didn't happen. Or maybe it did, and that's the part we're not ready to accept. Because if it did happen, then nothing is as it seems. Not the war. Not the jungle. Not us. Ridgway doesn't dream of the firefights. He dreams of the river. Still water. Trees leaning overhead. The heat on his neck. And somewhere in the brush, a figure standing just beyond his vision. Watching. Waiting. He wakes with the same feeling every time, that it wasn't finished. Not the war. Not the story. Something was left behind, and it's still out there. For years, he thought time would make it easier to forget. But time didn't erase anything. It just pressed the memories deeper, layer by layer, until they became part of him. Not loud. Not sharp. Just. Always there. Sometimes, it's the sound that brings it back. A cicada in late summer. A branch snapping under his neighbor's boots. The crack of wood in a fireplace. Each one dragging him backward, into a place where nothing ever made sense, and the trees never told the truth. Other times, it's silence that does it. Total, unnatural silence. That's the one he fears the most. Because silence was never empty out there. It meant something was close. He tried once, years ago, to tell his son. Just enough to see if he could say it aloud. They were fishing. Early morning. Still water. Ridgway mentioned the river, the way it bent around the jungle, how it looked just before sunrise. He said, it didn't feel like Vietnam. It felt older. His son asked what he meant. Ridgway paused. Smiled. Never mind, he said. Just the heat playing tricks. And that was that. Because saying more would have made it real. And real meant believing that something he still couldn't explain had walked out of the trees and stared back at him without fear. There are stories you tell around fires. And then there are stories you carry in your bones. The men who came back with these memories didn't ask to become believers. They weren't chasing ghosts. They were following orders. Patrolling jungle. Holding lines. Trying not to die. And yet, they saw something. Something that didn't make sense. Something they were never supposed to understand. And in the years that followed, they stayed quiet, not because they were afraid of ridicule, but because they weren't sure if truth could survive the telling. Some stories are like that. You don't share them to be believed. You share them so they don't die with you. So Ridgway wrote it down. Not for the newspapers. Not for a book. Just a few pages, stored in a drawer, with the map folded underneath. And on the final page, one sentence underlined twice. It didn't want to hurt us. He doesn't know if that was kindness. Or something worse. But in all his years, he's never forgotten the way it looked at him. Not as prey. Not as threat. Just as something strange and passing. Like we were the ones who didn't belong there. And maybe we still don't. The jungle has a way of swallowing history. Storms tear through old patrol trails. Vines crawl over rusted helmets. And bones, if they were ever left behind, are reclaimed by the soil. No monuments. No markers. Just the hum of insects rising into the heat. Somewhere, deep inside the hills of Quang Ben, the cave still breathes. Sun Dung remains open to tourists now. Guides lead hikers through its cathedral-sized chambers. Visitors post photos of the jungle growing under stone. They talk about light shafts and sinkholes, echoing rivers and walls of mist. They don't talk about the eyes. They don't talk about what might be watching from just beyond the glow of their headlamps. They wouldn't know what to call it if they did. The official record of the Vietnam War contains no mention of reptilian beings. No glowing figures. No humanoids tracking patrols through the dark. But it also doesn't mention the caves Ridgway circled on his map. Or the jungle clearing where compasses spun like tops. Or the way the radio fell silent when the air turned too still. The record remembers what we can explain. The rest gets left behind. And yet, the stories keep surfacing. An anonymous post on an old forum. A grainy photo with no citation. A soldier's voicemail sent to a paranormal show, cut off halfway through a sentence. Always in fragments. Always just enough to wonder. Maybe that's all the truth ever was in the jungle, fragments. Pieces too strange to fit into the bigger picture, so we toss them aside. But the picture is still missing pieces. And the jungle remembers where they are. Maybe it was just a war story. Or a hallucination. Or a shared myth born from fear, isolation, and too many sleepless nights. Or maybe it was something else. Something real. Something watching. Still.